Hey everyone, it's the Oxley Bomb MotoGP podcast with me, Matt Oxley, old race old journalist, and Peter Bomb, World Championship winning crew chief and data guy. Right, this week, what are we doing? We got a proper tech episode this week. We are talking about clutches and slipper clutches. How exciting is that? I mean, super important in MotoGP now. I mean, obviously the clutch has always been important in racing, but now with the starts, everything is about the start. If you get into the first, if you're on the third row and somehow you get into the first corner in fourth instead of ninth, you can race at the front. If you start on the third row and end up in the ninth in the first corner, that's probably about where you're going to stay. That is how important the start is now. So the clutch is super important, the whole start process. So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about slipper clutches, which is obviously opening the clutch on the way into the corner to stop the rear tire locking. And that is also super important to, engineers tell us that this is the part of the lap time where you can really make a difference now. The only part, because you think corner speed, you're pretty much limited by the edge grip of the tires, acceleration phase, traction control and the ride height device looks after everything. So the only place that engineers and riders can really, if they're really clever or really good, make a difference to lap time is on the way into the corners. So we're going to talk about why that's, how important that is. First of all, a little mention not from our sponsors, but from the nice people in Australia, the Smash Brand Group in Sydney, who are trying to find us sponsors. Anybody, any brand, any business wants to get involved with us, speak to our unique listeners who are all loaded. We actually have it on paper that none of them are less than millionaires. So, we're a good podcast to get linked up with. So, yeah, if you're interested in doing something with us, go to smashbrandgroup.com.au and get in touch. Thank you. All right. So what we're going to do here is Peter, being the clever guy, he's going to tell us all about it, and I'm going to pretend to be the listener. And if he's running away with too much technology, I have to, I'll put my hand up and say, whoa, what does that mean? So I'm going to be like the dumb, I'm going to be the dumb listener, which I kind of somehow sort of fall very naturally into. I don't know why, but, yeah, there we go. All right, Peter. So you're at the starting gate with your fingers on the clutch, ready to go now, aren't you?
I know. I knew I'm in trouble when we learned over the time, Matt, that we completely skip the pre-podcast talk because we go straight into it because we don't want to waste any ammunition. But this time we needed some extra time because you and me have a very different opinion and relation with technology. I'm definitely not smart, far at all. I have a lively imagination and a fantasy, so I can try to connect some dots together. But obviously, I have technical background. I was laughing when you say the clutch is so important because that's the one lever that you actually see completely folded away after the start. They can't even reach it anymore. The clutch lever at the moment on modern race bikes is there where you can't reach it, basically. So they use it to leave the pit box without too much noise. And then one time at the start, and after that they forget it. But you're right. Yeah. So what I did, or what we're going to do here, is having me explaining with Matt as the filter between our audience and me, what I see, what I think, what I see and what I think is happening at the moment, especially in MotoGP, but partly also in World Superbikes, during the whole, during two important phases. First of all, the starts, because that's super, super important, like Matt just explained, and the whole braking phase, which in the end, 30% of the time on average on every track, we are trying to decelerate the bike as effectively as possible, which is only very partly down to the front brakes. It's a lot about using the rear tire as well to stop the bike. And with the rear tire, we're talking about the rear brake, and we're talking about the engine brake, which is partly the engine itself that we use with the butterflies, and also the clutch. So there we go. Where do you want me to start, Matt? Start. Shall I just...
I interviewed a couple of riders a couple of years ago about the start. Shall I just start off with these riders and then we can go into the technology of it? So we're talking to the riders, get them telling us how they do it, and then we can go into the technology. Should we do that?
Yeah, do I have a choice? No.
No, you do. You can tell me to fuck off anytime, Peter.
No, we're just about to get big sponsors and get really rich. I'm bound. I have to deal with you anyway. Yeah. So anyway.
All right. Yeah, I'd like you. So you can tell me to F off anytime. I'm quite happy to F off. I wrote a story about the start a couple of years ago, and so I'm just going to read you couple of quotes from Danilo Petrucci and Jack Miller about what they do at the start. This was Danilo in his last season in MotoGP with KTM, which was what, 22? Was it? Something like that? I don't know, something like that. So, nothing much has changed. Well, things have changed a bit, but not really. Okay, so here's Danilo Petrucci talking about the start. He's always got such a wonderful way with words. He said, the start is a big work between the right hand and the left hand with the throttle, the rear brake and the clutch of a MotoGP bike is quite difficult. You try to release the clutch as early as possible, and you try not to get too much wheelie or use too much rear brake and not close the throttle too much. It's a mix between these three which allows you to do a good start. It's like playing a musical instrument. Lovely way with words, like I said. And here's Jack Miller. This is a little bit longer, but it's really interesting because it just sort of sets the scene for what Peter's going to tell us. I try not to get too much temperature in the clutch, so I wait until the guy with the flag walks off. As soon as he starts moving, I bang it into gear, and then you're just watching the lights in gear idling. Then the lights come on, you're revving, and it's 1, 2, and you almost anticipate it. Then it's all in the clutch. My starts come from my motocross and dirt track background. I give it a handful, the bike leaps forward a few meters, I catch it back with a clutch and feather it from there, rather than screaming it out with the clutch from the beginning. Managing throttle, clutch and rear brake isn't the rider's only concern. He's also aiming for the best entry point into the first corner. So I sit right up against the tank and get my elbows up in the air so I can muscle the bike where I need to, rather than have my elbows down, which allows the bike to take you where it wants. You need to be on top of it, so you're more in control. If you use your body to control the bike, it becomes upset. So I keep my core quite central and use my legs and head to control where the bike is going. If I need the bike to go that way, I'll use that leg to sway the bike that way. When I shift to second, I get my feet on the foot pegs, and then in third and fourth, I start managing the wheelie with the rear brake, though I still do most of that with the clutch. So you can see the guys are using the clutch all the way up into fourth gear, playing with it to reduce wheel speed, to reduce wheelie and so on. So that sound is that. So now we're going to look at it from the sort of technical point of view, Peter. So I mean, it looks to me like now the riders do pretty much dump the clutch, right? You see them at the start, that the lights come on, they all sort of squat down, basically, they all lie down because obviously trying to get their weight as far forward and as low as possible. So they put their heads under the bubble pretty much, and you see their hands go full throttle, and pretty much they dump the clutch. So let's start off with that. Is that what they do?
Yes, but like you said, Danilo and Jack had another story. But I think, and actually that was what making me wonder, is I really see them just dumping the clutch like bam, out, and that's it. Yeah. So what I'm going to tell now is what I think is happening at the moment in MotoGP with the clutch during the start. It's not information based on somebody telling me, opening the book and saying, look, this is this and this and this and this. It's just a summary of a lot of different small things that I heard that were partly connected to it and things I really see on the bike. And there's one or two facts that came from not to be named sources. So what I think is happening at the moment is that the clutch has to be in the rider's control all the time. So we see, for example, at most manufacturers, hydraulic clutch control on the left-hand handlebar. But on at least 2 MotoGP bikes, I see that on the engine, the clutch is not controlled hydraulically. It is controlled by a cable. So connecting to many other things that I see and heard and been told to.
So the clutch, the control starts off with hydraulic. So the lever is high. There's a high, and then it goes down into something, and then it's a cable. So what's between the hydraulics and the cable?
Well, you have the master cylinder on the handlebar, and you expect to have the slave cylinder that is bolted to the engine, and that moves a pin through the gearbox shaft, and that on the other side of that gearbox shaft there is the clutch, and you actuate the clutch like that. What I'll see is that there is an actuator bolted to the bike that doesn't look like anything we've seen before, and it has a cable on it. So there is a device between what the rider is doing hydraulically with his left hand and what is actually actuating the clutch. There is a device in between. What I think is there is an engine in between, a stepper motor, whatever you want to call it, something.
An electric motor.
An electric-driven motor that makes a mechanical force that drives the clutch. So my understanding is there is, inside the spec ECU, there is still room to do some calculation and activates another device outside the ECU, which in this case is a stepper motor. So the engineers are allowed, I think that's what they do at the moment, writing a strategy situation that if this, then this. So the rider dumps the clutch, then the ECU starts to see the position of the bike, how much wheelie it has, how much wheel spin it has, and so on and so on and so on. And depending on the situation, it is able to have the clutch slide. So the ECU can let the clutch slide during the start. That's why we see the riders dump it completely. Like I said, okay, I'm not sure.
So when they dump it completely, it slips a bit, which is obviously... It keeps
on slipping.
They don't have to slip it themselves anymore.
Exactly.
They just dump it and then. But I thought electronics in the clutch were banned.
Yep, there you are. Apparently there is a little gray area. You could be working, so maybe Gigi, I don't know. Somebody found in the gray area, or in ITA there was a decision saying, okay, this is what we mean with yes or no, because in the end this is an electronic helping on the clutch. But the rider always overrules the clutch. If the rider thinks, okay, the strategy is crap, my crew chief made a mistake, the thing goes sky high, he grabs the clutch and overrides the motor always. Yeah. So he doesn't rely on the engine 100%, but an engine, an ECU strategy is more, does always the same. So once you fine tune it and it does the same, it's more reliable than a rider who can be yes or no, more nervous or not feel completely where the revs are of the bike. So I think at the moment there is electronic help coming from the strategy in the ECU, driven by a motor that lets the clutch slip during the start. And once you have this system, it doesn't get automatically super easy. It sounds like then everybody can have the perfect. It still is really, really complicated. But at least you have one variable less. And technicians like to take out, especially an unreliable variable like a human being, take him out. That's what they do. I think before that, they started to work a lot with combinations of traction control and wheelie control and whatever to have the same results. But then every time the rider does something different, he moves his way to another area. He dumps the clutch with another speed, and the clutch itself, remember what Jack just said, is not always the same. The clutch is a hugely complicated thing. It's like a Swiss watch, So, and after it has been come to a certain temperature, or it has 2 temperature cycles, or during the sighting lap, he slipped it a little bit too much, it will have a different grab point and so on. So what I think at the moment is there is electronic help, and at 1, 2, probably more of the current MotoGP bikes.
That's really interesting because it kind of fully explains why, because we all sit there and how the fuck can they just dump that clutch? Because they've got 300 horsepower there, and just reducing in the electronics, the torque delivery wouldn't be enough, would it? So that explains exactly why they are doing that. And it looks to me like they're all doing it. So they must all have this kind of little electric motor kind of slipping the clutch for them. Well, so basically the electric motor is just it just opens the clutch a little bit. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, Matt, the action inside the clutch itself, you move a certain plate against a couple of springs. You don't need 20 meters to open a clutch. You need 0.6, 0.8, maximum 1 millimeter to move it, and it's completely free. Yeah. So it's just a short, quick movement that can be done by a stepper motor and then controlled by an electronic strategy. Yep, it can. And I think that's what they do. And while we are at it, that's the start sorted. So maybe to give a little bit more background about the start, because these bikes have a super amount of horsepower and torque available. And obviously, once the rider pushes the button launch control, the electronic goes like switch off completely and do something else completely, because this is such a weird situation that he forgets all about wheelie control and traction control and everything. He goes to launch control. And launch control can include partly traction control and maybe partly wheelie control, but it's basically a whole different set of things.
Yeah, so basically when the rider comes to the start on the left handlebar, there's a button, and when the rider, white button, Well, they can change the color.
No,
I think
even
on the
colors are
Ducati it's blue.
standardized. Okay,
I think on the
whatever,
Ducati it's blue, and it's if you think of on a road motorbike, you've got your switch gear. It's kind of right down the front, under the bottom. On the Ducati, they all have them in different places, don't they? So that as soon as you do that, that cancels out all the other electronics, right?
Yeah.
And it goes into launch control mode. And as far as I'm aware, the launch control is torque delivery. So it adjusts the torque delivery, massively reduces the torque. So the rider, even though he's going full throttle, he's not going to get full torque because the bike would just loop over backwards. So it massively reduces torque control. We're not quite how much, maybe by 50%, but something huge.
More than 50 probably, yeah. Because
and then there's the torque delivery, which can be adjusted all the way towards the first corner.
Yeah, there is a moment where you switch from launch control to normal control. This can be when you hit second gear, but can also be another set of circumstances. So when the rider hits this button, says launch control, the first thing that happens is that the ECU limits the RPM. This is logic, of course.
Yes.
So, for example, 9,000 RPM, 8,000 RPM. It also limits a lot the torque to a level that is like estimated by the engineers. And that's one of the reasons they do all the practice starts, to get a feel for this tire on this track. We do a couple of practice starts. They usually go completely wrong on Friday morning, but that's exactly why we need to do them. And the clever riders do them on left and right side of the track because you don't know where you end up. One line will be clean, the other part will be dirty. That's how you gather the information about how much torque you probably can deliver through the rear tire. The next thing is this torque is connected to a table, and it is like depending on the speed of the bike. Because when you stand still, you need a certain amount of torque to break the traction, but not too much, because if you just break the traction, you get a smooth, nice little slip level which increases the grip. And then you have to start driving. But I think maybe even for every 2 or 3 kilometers per hour, they can set the amount of maximum torque that they allow to be used. And that is probably always a little bit too much. So the clutch can slip a little bit to keep things in control.
Yeah. But as far as I'm aware, there's no traction control in the launch control setup, is it? As in the same software that they used coming out of corners, that is not part of the launch control.
No, therefore the speeds are too low. The situation is too weird. They create, like I said earlier, when they push launch control, everything goes completely different. Yeah, but there is a switch over. There is a switch over moment where launch control goes into wheelie control, traction control, and everything. They maybe even have a type of a traction control which is completely adjusted for only the launch. This is possible. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm just really. I found it fascinating to sort of find out, or at least think I found out, that that they're using a motor to control the clutch, and the rider can still override it. That this is possible in the rules, because it must be possible. If I see it, everybody knows it. I'm the last of the technicians to see something.
When do you think factories started using these electro kind of servo motors, or whatever you want to call them?
I don't know, but I know this is the last year. Because somebody else told me that inside the current spec issue, there is still like room to do some calculation and have some outputs that you can use to drive a motor. But that will not be the case in the new electronics.
Right. So it's all being banned, which sounds good news to me. News to me. I mean, this is all part of the 2027 rules that, in various ways are going to put more control back in the hands of the riders, taking it away from the engineers, giving it back to the riders, which is an excellent thing. Because a few years ago, Aprilia did something that they had to back down on, didn't they? This was 3-4 years ago?
Yeah. I think 4 years ago.
I can't remember what it was. What was it?
That was also the time we said, fuck, these Aprilia guys, they just dumped the clutch. And suddenly we learned that they were like, they get a message, okay, that's maybe too far out of the spirit of the rules, and they had to pedal back a little bit. But somebody somehow find a way within the rules to do it. Okay, this is the last year anyway. And they're all looking at each other. Nobody has a huge secret in MotoGP. I don't think so. So I just want to share with what I sort of see and also sort of learned by connecting many different comments and situations together.
Are they all using carbon clutches now?
No. When your name is Yamaha, not. Which is surprised me also, because that's like, it's only money and then you have it and it's immediately lighter. But I was told, more or less, recently, that until very recently, they didn't have the carbon clutch. No.
So I've got my dog here with me. So
when I said carbon clutches, I was thinking, wow, somebody's getting in control of the MotoGP, because with Brembo also being the owner of AP Lockheed in England, which makes clutches for probably the biggest part of the MotoGP field, has everything that's carbon comes finally in the end from Brembo. Yeah, whether it's for braking or for clutch.
Brembo brakes, Öhlins forks, AP Lockheed clutches. I mean, it's becoming quite
Öhlins, they needed to sell a little bit of Pirelli, which they had before. So everything.
Okay. When I mention my dog here, I've got introducing my dog Milo to everyone. He's had an operation, so I've got to keep an eye on him while my wife's at work, so he doesn't start pulling out the stitches.
And maybe he finds it hugely interesting, this how to get off the line quickly and the reaction time.
He's fascinated. He's fascinated. I mean, one of the things that always impresses me, because when you see a rider, on a 300 horsepower motorbike go full throttle and just dump the clutch, that takes a lot of belief in your engineers, a lot of trust in it, because, I mean, even if you did it on a little bike, a 125, you go to the traffic lights, don't do this, but you go to the traffic lights, open the throttle full and just let go of the clutch. You're going to flip over backwards. That's on a 15 horsepower, 125. Try doing that on a 300. You have to have massive trust. Well, obviously you're going to build up the experience and say, yes, this will work. I'm not going to die. But nonetheless, it kind of makes me wince whenever I see them. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, this reminds me of, I don't know. He didn't tell me. Somebody else tells me. But Carl Crutchlow once, when he went to Yamaha's first year in MotoGP, what electronics do when electronics try to help a human, and the help is not very sophisticated, it feels like wrong for us. This goes from throttle control to everything that electronics does in my car, which I hate because it feels so natural. So Carl wasn't very dissimilar. He said, well, take off all the electronics. I can do the starts better without. And the next thing he knew, he was pointing skywards and nearly saved himself from flipping backwards. So yeah, it wasn't that easy. It wasn't that easy.
And since we're talking about the starts, although it's not specifically clutches, you were just talking about the grip and so on the different side of the track. And I know that you can tell us a little bit more about the ride height devices, how they set the front fork height at the start of before the start. So if you've got loads of grip, you can afford to have the front super low, which obviously takes grip away from the rear. But if you've got super grippy starting area, that doesn't matter.
How weird is that, eh?
Yeah, it's mad that they're literally...
It's one of the parameters you have to set up for the race, is how deep you want the front fork to lock on this particular track. And it's depending on two things. Basically, how much grip you can take away from the rear tire without compromising the start by lowering the front even more. But it's also the first corner. If we're in Silverstone or in Phillip Island, you're in trouble. Especially if you're not on the front row. Even in Phillip Island, last year, I think it was Phillip Island, that the rider having the whole shot had still to brake unnaturally hard and aggressive, bringing everybody behind him in danger. But he had to be sure that he unlocks the front fork position, because at the first braking you need to go even deeper than where it is at the start, which is when the first corner is more a kink of a corner, it's not automatically happening. So that's the other reason. So
it's kind of crazy that how complex these things are now. They're literally setting the kind of the whole shot fork stroke height according to how grippy the track is, and not only the track, whether it's the left of the track or the right of the track. And I mean, wow,
imagine
crazy.
that, being the rider sitting there on Sunday on the grid, thinking, okay, I'm in the hands of the gods and my engineer now. I mean, you have already a lot on your mind because the whole world is looking for you. You don't want to make a mistake. It's super important to start, but you also know I just have to dump the clutch, see what happens, be fully prepared if it goes sideways, left or right, up and down. And then I should not forget that if I sort of half screw up my start, I will arrive to turn one from another perspective, maybe have to brake 2 times a little bit, then don't release the front brake, the front right height device, then I don't release the rear right height device, and then my race is even worse. That's all you need to think of when you're sitting there.
I mean, the most famous instance of people going sideways is probably Pecco Bagnaia at Aragon a couple of years ago. I think it was a couple of years ago, 24, I think. When he was on his way to he was fighting, was it 23? One or the other. And he just got massively sideways in both the sprint and because he was on the dirty side of the track. And the track was very dirty. And you're seeing riders react to, just being in the middle of that pack of 20 riders and the thing going sideways and trying to navigate your way past other riders who are going sideways. And it's pretty scary, really. And I think getting rid of the whole shots and all this will make the electric clutch motor and so on. I think this will make the starts much better because the riders will be much more involved. You'll see more wheelies. You'll see they have to control more. But at the same time, I think they'll be safer because I think there's less chance of the things going completely sideways at the start. I could be wrong.
Yeah, and even more important for safety for me, which normally is not the highest thing on my list, but anyway, we have to, is you don't arrive with the whole fucking bunch still together on turn 1 in Aragon, for example, which is the last thing you really want. People will have a brilliant start and people will have a shit start. And when when they arrive at first corner, there will already be okay distance between the first and the fifth and the 10th and the 5th. It's not like the whole bunch comes, because now 70% of the grid, or maybe even more, always has the same start. So you arrive more or less as you had the grid formation, which is not always take Barcelona with such a long drag race to the first corner and then a super tight first corner. Is scary. We're going to get rid of that.
Yeah, good. And interestingly, they've used this little electro servo motor to introduce a bit of clutch slip at the start, so the rider can dump the clutch. So instead of having to slip it himself, the servo motor does it for him. But you were telling me earlier that they all use a system now where the clutch slips every gear shift. They actually introduce a tiny little bit of clutch slip at every gear shift because that's better than having wheel spin. So the torque shock is so heavy every time you shift up that that shocks the rear tire into spinning. And with the TC at the moment, it isn't that high tech. And once that Michelin starts spinning, it won't slip. It won't stop. So what they do now is slip the clutch a little bit at every upshift. So are they all doing that or?
No. From 2, I know, but I can't name them because even that I'm not 100% sure. It's not GG.
So explain how that works then.
Well, it's probably, thinking back of it, where everything started. So you remember when, long story short, we had this, when the seamless shifts came up, we all found this is a brilliant idea because now we can shift up and it's such a short time that we have constant traction and we have a better acceleration in shorter time we make the speed. That was logic, but what it does not do, seamless shift, is release the peak of torque that goes through the rear tire. It just makes the time that the rear tire does not slip, make it a little bit shorter. So you're at the end of 4th gear, you're slipping whatever 5, 6, 7% rear wheel faster than the front wheel. Then you stop it and you come back harder again. Then it starts to slip 10% and you have to wait until it drops back to 4 or 5% and it has all the grip again. With seamless, that problem is not solved. It's just a shorter time that you have no acceleration, but you still have this peak of torque. So what I learned is what they're doing with the same hardware that we just mentioned is make at every upshift automatically short time the clutch slip for a little bit, for a little short time. You take out that peak that normally will disturb the slip level from between the rear tire and the track. And by smoothing that thing out, you have a constant slip, which is great for acceleration because with motorbikes, we always, nearly all the time, have too much power, too much torque to transmit. So that's a beautiful way.
How long would it open the clutch for to make the clutch slip, like a quarter of a second or something like that?
A lot shorter because you're speaking of very, now I'm shit with numbers.
A tenth of a second,
believe it or not, from a data guy, but it's a really, really short time that because the seamless made it possible to shift up to another gear, super, super short time. But now they need to start immediately as soon as the command comes from shifting. It's sort of the motor will like rocket the actuation pin from the clutch. probably 2-3 tenths, just a little bit. You don't need to open the clutch completely. You just need the clutch to open a little bit, just enough that this opening absorbs the peak in torque. So the tire doesn't need to do it, doesn't need to spin up. Then the whole transition is so smooth. But it's quite a thing to do this, because you have to do the time that you have for shifting, to do something during the shifting is different from every gear. From first to second is a big gap. 5th to 6th is short. Then you change the gearbox. Then you change your final ratio. Then the track level. Then we have a shitty rear tire with a super hard carcass. Or everything has to go into these calculations again, which is beautiful. Yeah. But that's what I learned they're doing. And probably, Matt, thinking now, that's probably where it once started. And then Donna said, "Yeah, this is inside the rule. Cool. Don't bother." Then somebody else was thinking, that's nice for the start maybe as well. And then they decided, okay, it's the last year anyway, or the last 2 years. I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm actually not allowed to. But
and presumably the clutch slip time in every gear change would probably shorten with every gear, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Like, this is the basic thing in racing. If I set up shift lights for a motorbike, I choose the shifting moment. I choose for every gear differently, because you fall back less RPM in every higher gear.
Yeah.
Which is the same idea.
All right, cool. So have we covered the clutch now?
We started only the one side direction of the clutch, shifting up, but we're also shifting down.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I mean.
We did the upshifting, we did the starts. Yeah, I spread all the rumors. I talked I explained my fantasies about what could be happening, probably yes or no.
Yeah, so we've done the start and the shifting up, and we're now going to do the slipper clutch and shifting down, which as we said earlier on, is super important. I've got a little quote here from Romano Albeziano, who used to be the Aprilia technical director, now HRC director. And he's talking about the engine brake phase here. And he's not just talking about the slipper clutch. He's also talking about the engine brake electronics, which adjust the throttle butterflies and all that kind of stuff. So he says, having a stable engine brake character is important, super important. Also, the braking phase and the engine brake strategies are the most complicated things, because it's a very unstable phase for vehicle dynamics. I mean, when you're careering towards a corner, hard on the brakes, the thing going this way and that. I mean, like he says, it is the most unstable part of the lap time. The rider coming out the corner, the rider's on the throttle. Okay, you might be using a tiny little bit of rear brake or whatever, but basically the thing's all being done, isn't it? So there's not a lot going,
Especially with right-height devices and so on. There is so much
going into the corner. He's shutting the throttle. He's using the front brake. He's using the rear brake. There's an awful lot going on. It's an incredibly important part of the lap time, the most important part of the lap time. And I'm going to. So you've got a slipper clutch, which basically. What a slipper clutch does is it opens the clutch on the way into the corner. So it basically creates clutch slip. It creates clutch slip on the way into the corner. We've been talking about having clutch slip on accelerating, and this is clutch slip during braking. And tell me if I'm wrong here, Peter, but I'm going to try and explain how a slipper clutch works from an idiot's perspective, which is my speciality. Okay, so when the rider shuts the throttle and the tire starts to lock, that resistance opens the clutch, right? Would that be correct?
Yeah, because on gas, the engine is driving the rear tire against all the forces. But when he closes the throttle, the rear tire, as long as it doesn't slip, starts to drive the motor. But four-stroke engines don't want to get driven by something else. They have a huge resistance, which depends obviously on compression rates, but also on RPM. So if the rider brakes and immediately goes back through the gearbox, like bam, go back, there's a huge amount of back torque that needs to get rid of. Otherwise, the rear will just be stop turning at all. It's like you hammer on the rear brake and completely lock it. So you need to do something with all this negative torque that comes from the engine that wants to stop the rear tire from turning. Because in the end, Matt, just like in acceleration, you want to have a slip level. You want to control the amount of slip between the tire and the tarmac. You want to have it in the sweet spot from this amount of percentage where it's beautiful, where it's actually more grip than normally and still turns a little bit. If it's slipping a lot more, like you slam on the rear brake, that's why once people invited ABS, you have no grip left and you just are a passenger on your motorbike. If it's not enough, obviously you're wasting time. 30% of the time you're on the brakes. So there's a lot of time to be gained or lost if you got the whole braking phase wrong. Now, the braking phase is obviously about the front brake first, having full control over what the front tire is doing in MotoGP. Then they need to shift back, and the shifting back to take out to have this engine brake phase a little bit stable. They have a slipper clutch that works with springs that it can open. When there is a certain back torque coming, it starts to open. And this certain is completely adjustable. So you adjust at what negative torque it starts to open, how far it can open, and how quickly it can open. These are the 3 parameters in the clutch itself. And then after that, we start to control the engine brake by opening or closing the butterflies in the engine, which is adjusting the engine. This is a really sweet way. We talk about it a lot as well before in other podcasts. Riders talk a lot about it because that is most of the time the engine brake comes from adjusting the butterflies. But during the downshift, every time you downshift, you have a negative peak torque where you hit the next lower gear. And that is the moment that the clutch has to open shortly, because that is a mechanical hit, a mechanical torque that goes through the whole bike. And if you wait until the butterflies react to that, you're always a little bit too late. So the slipper clutch is there to take out the peaks in back torque and open a little bit. And then there is the control by the butterflies. Even later in the whole part, there is also a valve in the end of the exhaust that controls, like a truck, the engine brake as well. And now,
I mean, you can actually. That's one of the few little things that you can see on a MotoGP bike. You know, those little boxes. They're just kind of at the end of the exhaust pipe before the silencer at the top. You can always see them on most of the bikes. They're very obvious to see.
And what Romano was explaining, I love his way he explained this as an engineer. It's a very unstable situation. Yeah, because like you said, riders can do it differently in different parts of the corner. Where are they sitting on the bike? Where do they have the legs? Do they come up or do they not come up? But more importantly, if they are very aggressive with the front brake, it makes a huge difference, because then suddenly the bike doesn't even have any weight on the rear tire at all. So all the electronics are out of the window. It's in the air, but it will come back on the ground. And it will do something there. So riders need to be aware of it. And the whole chassis suspension dimensions have to be set up in order not to disturb the braking phase. This brings me down to what we already said probably 20,000 times in this podcast, that Ducati was the first to realize we have to have a dragster and we have to have a bike that stops in a straight line. Everything else we leave to the rider and we work on later. And our bike will only stop, Matt, if it has 2 wheels on the ground, solidly on the ground.
Yeah. And as you say, this is not only about the slipper clutch and about the engine brake electronics. It's also about the wheelbase and the center of mass of the bike. So you're trying to get it so that it will keep some weight on the rear tire, even though the bike is supposed to be pitching forward on the brakes. That's a huge part of it. And Albaziano told me at the end of last year, that's one of the reasons where Honda found quite a bit of its lap time last year was by lengthening the wheelbase to increase the performance of rear tire braking into corners. So hugely important.
100%. The Honda still had the Mark DNA in it, and just remember how difficult it visibly was for the whole world to see how Mark struggled his first year at Gresini Ducati to not ride the Ducati like a Honda when his instinct takes over, when he had a shit start or when it was qualifying time. He started to brake just too late, have the rear wheel in the air, because that was giving him this couple of tenths on the Honda, and it cost you more than a couple of tenths. It makes you even crash on the Ducati. Current MotoGP bikes that are successful, Aprilia and Ducati, look boring. They're just glued to the track, especially on the hard braking and into the corner. They're just on the rails. It is effectively, it's technically correct, but from us, from our point of view, it's less spectacular.
Yeah, well, and once again, hopefully, the idea of next year's rules that it will bring, it will stop that. It will make the bikes more physical, and most of the engineers like Alberziano and Fabiano Sterlicchini from Aprilia I've spoken to said the bikes are going to pitch an awful lot more, which is what you want. And that's what a motorbike's meant to do. That's what a normal motorbike does. You hit the brakes and it pitches forward. You get on the gas, it pitches back, just can I engage History Channel here a little bit about
Can I avoid you putting in History Channel?
So I mean, what was the first race bike to use a slipper clutch? I kind of heard rumors that MV Agusta started using them in the 70s, but I'm not so sure about that. I think the first bike to use a slipper clutch properly was the Honda NR 500. While everybody else was racing two strokes in the 70s, Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, Honda were like, well, no, we're going to carry on racing four strokes because we race four strokes. That's what we do. So they built the NR 500, which had oval shaped pistons, 8 valves per cylinder, 2 conrods per cylinder. Two conrods
it was 8-cylinder in the rules of.
It was basically it was kind of an 8-cylinder motorcycle, even though only 4 cylinders were allowed. Very, very clever. Amazing, full of insanely radical technology, and it never scored a single World Championship point.
Did it finish a race?
Yeah, no, it did. It was kind of getting there. It was getting there, and kind of just going back to the clutches. Actually, funny enough, because we're not. I think we should do a podcast about the NR 500 because it is just. Yeah, technically it is astonishing, but also emotionally and from a human point of view, the story of the shit that everyone went through in that project is we should do one, definitely. It's an amazing story. It peaked at 22,000 RPM. I mean, you think now that MotoGP bikes do what, 17, 18? Is that about right?
Probably 19.
Peter? Yeah, maybe 19. But this is 50 years ago. It was doing 22,000 RPM, and the problem was that obviously there was clutch starts back then. It was push starts, not clutch starts. So the thing, I don't know where it made power, but it was probably between about 18 and 22,000 RPM. Now imagine having to push start a motorbike like that doesn't really work until it gets up to like 15, 16, 17,000 RPM. You had to run at about 25 kilometers.
It depends on how high the first gear is. You need to get us
to get the thing started, and so some of the engineers reckon that if they'd had clutch starts back then, it might have, at least scored a point. but no, without getting too off on the NR story, it was the first bike with a slipper clutch because it had a very light engine inertia. So as soon as the rider shut the throttle from 22,000 RPM, it just locked the rear tire. So Honda were like, well, how do we fix this? Well, we need to get the clutch to slip on the way into corners. So they had, and it could be adjusted just like a slipper clutch can be adjusted now. They had 6 different color coded clutch springs of different weights. And then they had a whole chart, because everything was done with charts then, like paper
there's
charts.
No Excel sheets, there's no
as was jetting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
If you wanted to work out your carburation or your gears, everything was done with big paper charts. And there were about 100 different combinations of using these different clutch springs in different combinations to get the right amount of slip into the corners.
Yeah.
According to the track.
I immediately believe it. It's also completely logic that they did it, Matt, because they came in a time of 2-stroke with a very powerful 4-stroke. It's quite a difference if you close the throttle on a 2-stroke or on a 4-stroke. I can tell you that. It's quite a difference. So, they needed to do something there because the first thing they noticed is, okay, there we lose all the power. The thing I remember from slipper clutches is obviously Yamaha's R7, the original R7, the Norihaga times in Yamaha. They brought a World Superbike Special, which was almost a MotoGP bike. And I think the people who designed it also came from 2-stroke. At that time, 2-stroke was MotoGP. And that had a slipper clutch, but it was more like a one-way clutch. So either you open the throttle, you go forward, or you close the throttle and the thing starts to idling and there's just no connection anymore. So, then completely, if Nori went to turn 1 in Valencia and he closed the throttle, it became completely silent. Until he was past the apex, then the thing started to run again. That wasn't very effectively as well. That was wrong. But the idea was correct. They knew there is something here.
Because Ducati tried this, didn't they? it was when Capirossi was riding for them. So I think it was probably about 2005, something like that. They turned up at Jerez for pre-season testing, and basically, as soon as you started braking, it killed the engine. The main thing I think they were trying to do with that was save fuel.
That's more likely, yeah. It's a good combination, actually, of doing both. Yeah.
So literally, you as soon as the rider shut the throttle, the engine just died. And then when he got back on the throttle, it came back to life. But after about 3 or 4 crashes, they kind of, I mean, you just wouldn't want to be that rider, would you? Just like, okay, you want me to go and test that? Okay, I'll go out and test it. Boom, crash. I'm not so sure about this, mate.
No. Now I can be History Channel or like Memory Channel. 2006, I was with Ducati factory team in the AMA in America. So we were using 2005 superbikes from Neil Hodgson and Régis Laconi. We got really the exactly same bike. And as one of the electronic guys, I was also in charge of the parts that we needed to have in stock. There was one part, let me say it like this. There is one Yamaha dealer in Italy close to Bologna that was selling hundreds and hundreds except control motors that steer the exit in the Yamaha R1 at that time. The exit valve in the exhaust?
Yeah, the exhaust valve.
Controlled, that was actuated by a special, small, very neatly Japanese engine motor, because Ducati bought shitloads of them. We had them on our 2-cylinder superbikes as a first rope, they tried to do an engine brake control with it. So they needed this engine. So we needed the Yamaha R1 exhaust valve stepper motor. And we had it pushing against our butterfly, how you call it, the lock stop from your butterfly. How far you can close the butterflies on. If you close the throttle, it goes to nearly completely lock the butterflies. We had a movable lock, which was coming from a stepper motor from the Yamaha. So if the riders closed the throttle, it didn't went to a mechanical stop. It went to a position that was coming from the ECU and done by a stepper motor. So if it's on high RPM, we will open it more. If it's on low RPM, we open it less. So they were trying to get some control over these huge 1000cc 2-cylinder engines that had a super amount of negative torque. If you went in third gear on 10,000 RPM, you close the throttle, the thing would just lock the rear wheel. It's not engine brake, it's locking. So riders had to be careful there. And this was a very, very early attempt from Yamaha. And from Ducati. And these Yamaha engines from the exit valve had a very short lifetime. So I think it was like 700 kilometers that we put a new one on. Wow. We had four bikes there for a whole season. We did 22 events. We went probably through 100 of these Yamaha engines from the
Yamaha stepper motors.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
It was a good idea. Obviously not very fine-tuned, but it was really clear for everybody there is a problem here. You cannot just close throttle on a super high compression 2-cylinder superbike and think you get away with it. And then riders were trying to use the clutch by themselves a little bit. They were playing with slipper clutches, but also at that time Ducati was already playing with the butter valve position, which we now call the whole engine brake. Everything is done now with the butterfly position.
Although obviously Honda started with the NR500 in 79 with the slipper clutch, I think they didn't really come back in a big way until 4-stroke MotoGP arrived. That was basically it.
What a coincidence. 4-stroke is clutch. You need.
Road bikes. I'm just trying to think. I used to race an RC30 and whether that had a slipper clutch or not. I can't remember. Jesus. But I mean...
Think back when you were riding. You had your fingers on the clutch.
Well, because I learned on the 2-stroke, so I always had my fingers on the clutch, But I mean, I remember if any fans listening were watching MotoGP in the early days, like 2002, 2003, 2004, how sideways the bikes would get on the brakes. That was because this was the early years of slipper clutch technology, and there was so much work in those early years of 990 MotoGP working towards bringing in all the engine brake controls, electronics, which didn't exist then. Literally, it was just the rider did it all himself with the throttle, with the clutch, and that was basically the clutch was basically your slipper clutch. Until the slipper clutch and the engine brake technology got good, you had to, and that's one of the things that Casey Stoner really hated, because he was obviously super good at modulating the clutch lever to give himself the right kind of engine brake. And I think back to the 8 hour, guys like Mick Doohan, Wayne Gardner. Mick Doohan, when he was racing Honda NSR 500 two-strokes in MotoGP. When he went to do the Suzuka 8 hour every summer, he was, doing the whole season on a two-stroke, and then he'd go to Suzuka to race a four-stroke. So he basically turned the four-stroke into a two-stroke by, as soon as he hit the brakes, he would just pull the clutch in and just go.
Not even try to let it slip.
Nope. Just and keep it all the way in until he got to the apex, and then made sure he'd switched down clicked down the right number of gears, and then slowly fed it back in as he got on the throttle. And if you got that wrong, so easy on when you're racing to go down one gear too many or go down one gear too few, and if you're a sort of maximum lean coming out of a corner and you're opening the gas and putting the clutch back in, and you've gone down two gears, one gear too many, you crash.
Otherwise, you are not on the limit. Yeah.
No, exactly. And if you're on the limit, you can't do anything wrong because you will crash. And even if you were click down one gear too few, you might well crash as well.
Yep.
Because
the bike
you wouldn't
where you expected the last part.
Exactly. Yeah. So so next year, looking at 2027, I don't think anything's changing we're talking about how, you won't be able to have electronically induced slip during acceleration. Will the braking phase change next year, according to this, in the 2027 rules? How?
First of all, we have less aero to help with stopping. We don't arrive with the rear that has the tail on the ground. Yeah. Because that's also an advantage. You can initially brake a lot harder before the rear is so high that you start to balance it.
Because the riders use the ride height device during acceleration and also in the very early stages of braking, like you say, to keep the rear on the ground.
So, everything will change, but especially because the aero will not change as much as it does now. When the bike arrives now like a dragster with a low rear, until it has the rear up, the first moment you can brake super hard because the rear is not high, but when the rear is finally high, you have a lot more air resistance as well. That's why an example is KTM this year. They lost their superiority in top speed because they wanted to have some more corner speed and braking efficiency. And they got it, but it all comes with a price.
Yeah.
And remember, go back to the clutch, Matt, when I went to Moto2, was when Moto2 started. I was there from the first year, and I came from the Supersport series at that time. And I remember everybody was fully confused in Moto2, all the South European teams coming from two-strokes, Aprilias and Hondas, and they were playing for months and months with the good thing was there was a slipper clutch. I think it was a Sutter, but it doesn't matter. It was a slipper clutch with the whole all adjustabilities that you can have on it. And lots of teams spent almost a whole year always working on the slipper clutch because most of the riders also came from the two-stroke. Yeah. And they were looking for a particular feeling. They don't get that feeling. They go back to the box and wait until the mechanics have a better option because they want to have this feeling. I had the luxury coming from Supersport with Tenkate, which at that time was a super successful team. So I went... No, I came actually from Yamaha at that time. Doesn't matter. It's all about the Supersport 4-stroke. The riders have to get used to it. So I spoke with my rider and said, well, you're the slipper clutch because don't expect a miracle from us. You're just put your hands over it and always use it. And, the better riders, you don't need to tell them even twice that. They immediately, effectively, it looks like a stunt rider. So they go on the brakes. They go quickly, but not super quickly, down through the gearbox. If, for example, from 5th to 2nd gear. And as soon as the rear comes too much sideways, they just grab the clutch until the rear comes back in line. Then they open it again. So they're playing with the left fingers. And it's almost like a rear brake you control.
Hello.
You control the rear, the stability of the bike. It's like a little bit like a rear brake by letting the clutch slip, open, and then you finally have it in a good position. That was it. Another example, while we are at it, that's not History Channel, that's actually 3 days ago. I was in Oschersleben, a German track where the road to MotoGP from Dorna had this Moto 4 class, which is production Moto 3 bikes that were for the first time fitted with 2D data recording. So I was there to help with the teams to start getting used to 2D data recording. And one thing I noticed with a very young, I mean, some of these riders are 13, 14 years old. They had the first day a broken engine on one of these bikes. And we studied the data because now there was finally data on it. This rider, who was never really instructed how to ride these small 4-stroke machines, had the habit of arriving to turn 1 flat out in 6th gear. He closed the throttle, he goes down 2 gears, and then he starts braking. So the thing was, I mean, the rev limit of these bikes is 13,500. He went to 15,500. He did it 3 times, and then there was oil in the lower part of the fairing. Yeah, so that wasn't very successful. It's an example of how data can help you, but it's also an example of how engine brake can be controlled by clutch. And this is obviously a very cheap racing bike without a slipper clutch. And if the rider has no idea what to do, doesn't have his hand on the finger, then it can be costly.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Peter. I think that's probably about it, aren't we? Have we covered everything in clutches and slipper clutches?
Yeah, in clutches and slipper clutches. But there is one thing. I saw you posting a picture recently, Matt, which you do always a couple of times a year. Usually you post pictures about your endurance past when you see other teams posting pictures of they are testing somewhere. So you were... Can you tell us a little bit because you did this picture this morning about an RC30 British team where you were supposed to finish third but did not. And that's probably the same bike where you said, did I have a slipper clutch? You don't even know.
No, that was a Yamaha FZ750, which definitely didn't have a slipper clutch. But I'm trying to think, did the RC30 have a slipper clutch? I don't think it can have. But I remember setting back then, which was before anything, basically. I mean, this is the dark ages, prehistoric, basically. So, yeah, as you said, you as we said earlier, you had to use the clutch as your kind of slipper clutch. But also, there were no electronic controls. So the way you tried to stop the engine from shutting down completely, which would then lock the rear tire, was you had a super high idle thing. So even when you shut the throttle, the throttle's butterflies were still, the carburetors, as it was then, were still open, and the engine was still running. So the engine wouldn't stop. If you shut the throttle, it wouldn't just basically go down to idle and lock the rear tire. It was still running. So there's always a way that engineers and so on will find to kind of get around a problem, even in something incredibly basic like that.
It just shows the importance of this whole highly unstable braking phase, as Romano told you.
Yeah.
I love because it's so complicated. How the rider sits on the bike, how he approaches the brake. When does he downshift? How was the chassis set up? Is it set up for beautiful turning? It's probably not braking very well. Everything is coming together. And then you have the whole issue strategies for engine brakes and so on, and the clutch setting. So I love how complicated it is, because that in the end means you don't easily calculate it. You still have to have a very experienced crew chief and people in the box to say, the computer might say this, but there's also this and this and this. So for the moment, I go left. Beautiful. Yeah.
And that's another thing Alberziano said. It's sort of complicated by the fact that you've got some automatic controls overlapping with the rider's input on the throttle, on the brake, and so on. And not only, like you say, on the throttle, on the brake, but also where he's sitting, what's he doing to the balance of the motorbike. I mean, it's massively complicated. The more you think about it, the more complicated it is. It is going around a corner, very clever. Coming out of a corner, it's all amazing. But the place where the most shit is going on is from the moment the rider hits the brake, pops out behind the bubble, hits the brake, to the point where he's deep into the corner and sort of, pretty much full lean and away. That is the maddest phase of the whole thing.
And it brings me down to an explanation that I often use to open people's eyes is, when they're not able to brake very late, this has nothing to do, usually on normal bikes, if it's not MotoGP with all the control, if we speak about hobby racers and so on, and people go occasionally on the track, it's not that the other people brake so much more effectively upright than you. Even you and me are very old, but normal riders are also able to have a bike on the limit of the whole dynamics in the straight line. You just brake until the rear comes up and that's it.
Yeah.
The guy who brakes later than everybody else, or brakes later than you, is the guy that can go into the corner with more brake pressure.
Yeah.
And that's not just the front tire, it's also how the rear brake is following him. Because this whole engine brake strategy that I'm explaining, I work a lot with national level racing teams, which still can have some beautiful ECU settings to play with, like engine. And if the engine brake is set up a little bit wrong, which I often experienced, then it has not just not enough engine brake. It has too much. It has how it is said. It's the opposite. The rear keeps pushing the front, so the rider is braking, going down the gearbox, turning in, but effectively his rear wheel is still trying to push the front wheel.
It's still driving.
It's still driving. So he's braking against his own engine. He will look at everything except his engine brake. He will think front tire, front fork, doesn't turn. I need to keep on braking before I turn. But can be the ECU. But it's such an interesting phase. The whole braking upright, braking into the corner. What happens dynamically, but also emotionally with the rider is a lot. That's why you see the difference. I love it.
A lot of this comes from improvements in tires. You know, the rear 20 years ago, you couldn't brake.
Don't think about the rear.
At 45, 50 degrees with the rear tire because it just wouldn't take it. So, you know, everything, this is the way racing works. You know, the tire gets better, the engine brake software gets better than the tire. You know, we're on a constant upward spiral. And just think about, you know, the guy that's leading the championship at the moment, Marco Bezzecchi. When did he come to MotoGP? 2023, I think it was. 2022, 2023. But I remember either speaking to him or people that were racing with him at the time said that was where he was super good, was that braking, you know, from 45 degrees lean all the way to the apex, using how he was able to use the rear brake and to have the engine brake set up so that he could really decelerate a lot. And if you can decelerate a lot in a very short period of time, you're gaining advantage over the others. And also, you know, the better you can brake, and especially if you're using the rear tire, you can use a tiny little bit of skid to basically stick you around the apex, to tighten the apex and make the bike turn better, you know. This
also makes me think that he's probably, because with all respect, he was not an alien in my book. And even if he becomes world champion this year, I don't think he is, but he's probably a guy that is very good to work with for the technicians, because he could be the guy that at what he does every time exactly the same. That means you change something on the clutch, you get a result. You change something on the engine brake, you get a result. And that's very, very important. If a rider is not like a super alien Mark, which is also has its downsides and its scary sides, at least reproduce everything doing exactly the same every time, because the engineers love that, because then they can start to make the difference and you give them the result immediately. If you were just a rider setting from the Friday morning setup where he was half asleep, and Friday afternoon he starts to wake up, he will be a different guy on the bike. And you're chasing your own tail all weekend. Which actually Valentino did a lot of his big part of his career, waking up on Sunday and thinking, now I need to race.
I mean, that's the thing. The rider, you know, it's a very human sport, but at the same time, the rider needs to be a bit of a robot. You know, he needs to do everything the same every lap. And well, in particular phases of the race or qualifying, you know, that's also the thing. They need to be a robot, but they need to be a robot that kind of changes. You know, you ride the bike in a certain way during the first 5 laps, then you have to change various things on how you ride as the tires go down, and you're constantly evolving all the way through the race.
Your ideal rider is very, very stable in that he does everything at the same moment, but at the same time, if you give him something new, he comes back and saying, if I do this, it's better, but if I do that, it's not better. That's already taking 50% out of the next step. 50% more chance to have it. That's for sure how Mark comes back to the box. He's overriding the bike a little bit. He also knows exactly when I do this, it's worse. This is better. This and this and this is a whole other direction. And then it's still not easy, but at least it's easier to make the setup change that he needs. How come we always end up with Mark? Well, I didn't put a lot of Mark in it earlier. And I used him as an example when he went to Gresini as a very good example of supernatural rider that was in big trouble going to a Ducati, because that Ducati was the first bike that needed to ridden unnaturally coming from old school bikes.
Well, I mean,
and now
as we still say, he still doesn't look like Mark on the Ducati.
No.
You know, he was a joy to watch on the Honda because he had to wring its neck and the crazy things he was doing on it to get it to make the lap time. But, with the Ducati, as we always say, it makes the lap time the way it wants to make the lap time. It doesn't want the rider to interfere. Yeah. Oof. All right. Okay. I think we're done.
Yep.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Sam, producer. And thanks everyone for listening. We will be back next week. I think we know what we're going to be talking about next week, but it's top secret now, obviously.
Yeah. I'll be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finally with 3 weekends off in the middle of at the start of the season. Obviously we know why, because Qatar was postponed, but it's just a bit rubbish, isn't it? Having to wait 3 dead weekends between races so early in the season is a bit shit. But there you go. Yeah. So next weekend, another podcast, and the week after that, it will be back in action at Jerez, which will be great. All right. Thanks everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye bye.